Champions. They're a core part of every Pokémon game. The final goal, the ultimate peak you have to reach, to prove you've become a Pokémon Master. Every journey builds up to that one final battle, the moment where everything you've done gets put to the test. But not all champions are created equal. Some feel like a true final boss, a battle you actually have to prepare for, and others, not so much. So today, I'm ranking every main series Pokémon champion from worst to best. Not just based on strength, but on how memorable they are, how challenging they are, and whether they actually feel like a champion. So with that in mind, let's start from the very bottom. Alright, starting us off at the bottom, we've got Geeta. Now Geeta is supposed to be the top champion of Paldea, basically the strongest trainer in the region, but she doesn't really feel that way. Throughout most of the game, she's more of a background presence. You hear about her, and you see her occasionally, but she's not really involved in the main story. At least not in any meaningful way. She doesn't really drive the plot forward, and she doesn't have a strong personal connection to your journey, so by the time you finally face her, it just doesn't feel like a big payoff. Then there's her team. Her team consists of Espathra, Gogoat, Veluza, Avalugg, Kingambit, and Glamora. These are by no means bad Pokemon on their own, but it doesn't really feel like a final boss team. I'm not saying it has to have big dragons or anything, but it just seems a little underwhelming, particularly her ace Glamora, which is actually a cool choice, but how she uses it, not so much. Glamora's whole thing is setting up hazards for your team when it gets hit, but she sends it out last, which is totally backwards, and her team can't really take advantage of that. And for someone with the title of top champion, that really takes away from the fight. I actually like the champion ranking system in Paldea, but the final battle, Geeta just doesn't leave much of an impact. It seems like she's just there to be there, or maybe to make the professor battle afterwards seem even more prominent, as opposed to most games where the champion battle usually overshadows the villain battle. So, not very memorable, really one of the easiest champions, and not very involved. I'd say she goes right to last place. Not that great of a champion. Next up, we've got Diantha. And she actually is in the story, just not in a way that really sticks. Throughout the game, you see her a few times, usually alongside Lysander, and she definitely has more presence than someone like Geeta, but the problem is, she never really feels like a central figure. She's there, she doesn't really drive the story, and she doesn't have a strong connection to your journey as the player, so when you finally face her, it doesn't feel like everything's been building up to this moment. It feels more like, oh, there's the champion. Guess I should battle the champion. And then there's her team. She does use cool Pokemon, like Hawlucha, Tyrantrum, and Aurorus, and of course her Mega Gardevoir, which are all cool and unique choices. And even Mega Gardevoir is a good choice for the champion. But even with that, the battle itself just isn't that difficult. For a final boss, you expect something that really pushes you, but Diantha's fight just doesn't hit that level. I do like the idea that she's a movie star, that's very unique, but overall, she just doesn't leave a strong impression. She's an okay champion. So for me, she gets a low placement. Next in the list is Wallace, and Wallace is an interesting case. In Emerald, he steps up after Steven, and you see him involved in major events, especially during the Kyogre and Groudon situation. So compared to the last two champions, he already feels a little more connected to what's going on, and personality-wise, he definitely stands out. He's got that elegant, performer-type vibe, which really fits well with his water-type specialty. You can tell they were going for a more stylistic champion here, and to be fair, it works for him. But then you get to the battle, and it's a little mixed. Wallace runs a full water-type team, with Pokemon like Milotic, Gyarados, and Ludicolo. And Milotic is actually really great. It's bulky, it hits hard, and it definitely feels champion-worthy. But a full water team is pretty easy to counter on a standard playthrough. If you've got a strong electric or grass type, a lot of the challenge just kind of disappears. So while the fight can be solid, it's not always that difficult depending on your team. He does, however, have a lot more personality than the last two champions, and he feels like he's part of the world. But as a final boss, he's good, not great, also kind of near the bottom. He's stylish, but that's just not gonna cut it. Next up, we've got another interesting champion, and that is Alder. And he is interesting in a lot of ways because he is important to the story, but he's not necessarily the final boss. Throughout the game, you actually see him quite a bit. He's not just sitting at the end waiting for you. He's out in the world interacting with characters and playing a role in N's story. You get the sense that he's experienced, he's been through a lot, and he understands what it really means to be strong, which gives him a lot of personality. But of course, you don't actually battle him as champion during the main story. Before you get the chance, he's defeated by N, so instead of facing Alder as the final challenge, you go straight into battling N and then Getsus. So even though he is the champion throughout the game, he's not the one you actually have to overcome at the end. Now, you can battle him later in the post-game, and his team is actually pretty solid. So while Alder has great personality and strong involvement in the plot, he doesn't quite land as a good final boss. So he's better than some, just not the most impactful champion. Real quick, if you haven't already, make sure to follow my channel for more Pokemon content, or Rabambi will curse your next playthrough with dark magic. But for real, if you do like this content, follow my channel, it'll be great. The next champion is Iris, and Iris is a really solid example of a champion who actually feels like a final boss. If you played Black and White, you already know her from the previous game as a gym leader, so there's already some built-in familiarity there. But now, stepping into the champion role, she feels a lot more serious. She's got the same personality, but you can tell she's grown. Her team is, of course, heavily dragon-focused, Haxorus, Hydreigon, which immediately makes her more threatening. Her team definitely takes advantage of how strong the dragon type is at that time. So when you fight her, it definitely feels like a little bit of a step up in difficulty. And unlike Alder, you actually face her as the final challenge in the main story, which makes a big difference. Now, she's not super heavily involved in the plot, but as a final boss, she absolutely does her job. A strong champion battle, solid presence, and a clear step up from some of the more forgettable champions. The next champion is Steven Stone, and Steven is where you really start to feel that champion presence. Throughout Hoenn, you actually run into him multiple times. He's out exploring and helping deal with major events in the story. So unlike some of the earlier champions, he doesn't feel distant. He feels like part of the world, and he's a familiar face. Personality-wise, he's calm, confident, and just naturally comes across as someone who's strong and in control. He doesn't have to say it, and no one has to tell you. You can just tell when you meet him. He of course runs a Steel-type team, and his Metagross, if you're not prepared for it, it's bulky, it hits hard, and it really feels like a champion-level Pokemon. So when you face Steven, it actually feels like a proper final battle, and you get a good sense of accomplishment from defeating him. Now, he might not have the deepest character arc, but he doesn't really need one, because everything about him, his presence, his team, and his role in the world, it all just fits really well. He's a strong champion, and one of the best in the series. Next is Leon, and Leon is probably one of the most present champions in the entire series. From the beginning of Sword and Shield, you hear about him constantly. He's undefeated, he's the strongest trainer in Galar, and, just in case you forgot, he's also Hop's brother. Little joke from my last video. But unlike some champions who are just talked about, Leon actually shows up. He's involved in the story, he steps in during major events, and he genuinely feels like the region's top trainer. He feels like a real celebrity too. He's confident, he's flashy, and definitely leans into that celebrity champion role. And it really works. You get the sense that he is a big deal in this world. His team, of course, Aegislash, Dragapult, Haxorus, and his ace, Charizard, is built around Dynamax, which makes the final fight feel big and cinematic. It's one of the few champion battles that feels like a big event. Now, the whole game itself isn't the hardest overall, so that can take away from the challenge a bit, but Leon, as a champion, he delivers. Strong presence, strong team, and a battle that actually feels like a finale, so Leon is definitely near the top. He feels like one of the most complete champions, and definitely one of the most memorable. Hop will not let us forget. Next up, we've got Professor Kukui, and Kukui is one of the most unique champions in the entire series, because technically, he is not one. In Alola, there's no established champion before you, so instead, he kind of steps in as the final challenge, the one you have to defeat to become the very first champion of the region, and it works pretty well for this game. He's constantly around, he's guiding you, supporting you, and helping set up the entire Pokemon League in the first place. So when you finally face him, it actually feels like everything has been building to that moment. It's not just some random final boss, it's someone who's been part of the journey the whole time. And he has a fairly balanced team, and he even uses the fully evolved version of the starter that's strongest against yours, which is a really nice touch. It makes the fight feel personal, like a true final test. Now, he's definitely not the hardest champion level battle in the series, but in terms of presence and payoff, he does a really great job. He's unique in that he's not a traditional champion, strong connection to the story, and definitely one of the more memorable endings in the series. Kicking off the top 3, I don't know how popular this is going to be, but I've got Blue, and he is one of the most satisfying in the series, because you're not just fighting some final boss you barely know, you're fighting your rival, and of course, he actually becomes champion before you do. So by the time you reach the end of the game, it's not just about winning, it's about catching up to him, and finally surpassing him, and giving him one of these. And it's very satisfying to finally do that, so that alone makes the battle feel more personal than most champion fights. And then there's his team. Alakazam, Exeggutor, Arcanine. He runs a really well-balanced team. And of course his fully evolved starter, which is the one that's good against yours. So you're dealing with a team that's built to challenge you specifically. It's actually a pretty tough fight. This one really feels like a final test of everything you've learned. As far as difficulty, it's a really balanced battle, and the context of the battle really carries it. So, Blue, top tier champion. And at the big number 2, I've got Lance. And Lance is the definition of a classic Pokemon champion. And what really sets him apart is that he's not just a final boss. He's been around for a long time, as one of the strongest trainers in the region. And then, in Johto, he steps into the role of champion. But more importantly, you actually get to see him in action. During the Team Rocket storyline, he doesn't just sit back and wait for you to fix things. He is actively involved. He helps you infiltrate their base, takes part in shutting down their operation, and he shows he's willing to step in when the region is in danger. And that gives him a level of presence that most champions just don't have. Like, what's the role of a Pokemon champion if they're not going to save the region when it's in trouble? Seems like it would be his job. By the time you finally reach the Pokemon League, you're not facing a stranger. You're facing someone you've already seen as a powerful ally. So Lance's team is built around dragon types, with multiple Dragonites. Dragonites? Gyarados, Aerodactyl, and his Dragonites are turds. And they seem to always have a move that's good against you. Of course, in those early generations, dragon types were incredibly strong. They were rare and hard to counter, and immediately made the fight feel more intimidating. So when you face Lance as champion in Johto, it feels like a true final test. His team obviously isn't perfect though. The repeated Dragonite can feel a little redundant, and depending on your team, it can be manageable. But even with that, Lance still feels like a champion. He is iconic, he's involved in the story, and he carries that sense of authority, and it makes the final battle feel important. So Lance definitely earned that number 2 spot. A good champion with real presence, and one of the strongest out there. But there's one champion who's going to push you even further. And finally at number 1, we've got Cynthia. And Cynthia is everything you want in a Pokemon champion. From the moment you meet her, you can tell she's important. She shows up throughout the Sinnoh region, guiding you at certain points in the game, helping you when things start to escalate with Team Galactic. So she's not just waiting at the end, she's part of the journey. And of course, what really sets Cynthia apart is the battle. Her team is one of the most threatening in the entire series, and very balanced. Spiritomb at the time had no weaknesses, Togekiss was a huge pain, Lucario, Milotic. It's a team that requires you to actually think and prepare before challenging her. And then of course there's her Garchomp. And if you fought Cynthia before, you already know. He is a problem. It hits fast and it hits hard, and it can easily sweep your team if you're not prepared. Even on a standard playthrough, it's easy to make a mistake or get unlucky, and then she just clears your team. And it doesn't just stop with Sinnoh. She shows up later in Unova, and if you're not ready, she will absolutely destroy you. And that just adds to her reputation. But when you finally face Cynthia, it doesn't just feel like another battle. It is a true test. Now, she doesn't have the most dramatic personality, and her story role isn't the most central, but everything she does have is executed perfectly. A strong presence, an incredible team, definitely one of the most challenging fights in Pokemon. So Cynthia takes that number 1 spot, the ultimate champion. When people are thinking of difficult battles in Pokemon, she's like the battle that you think of. They probably won't make a champion as strong as her again. Thank you everyone so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out my video of ranking Pokemon rivals, and follow my channel for more Pokemon.